Hey, wealth builders, welcome. Comment the country you're tuning in from. Let's see how global our squad really is. There's something utterly fascinating about the world of investments, something that often escapes most people's attention. We're talking about secret strategies, almost invisible techniques, that have allowed countless individuals to build financial empires over the years. But the reality is, it's not as simple as many believe. Sure, it seems straightforward to just pick the right stocks or buy properties in the right market, but there's so much more at play. When we think of investors, the first names that might come to mind are usually Wall Street traders, hedge fund managers, or tech moguls who made billions in a short period of time. But there's a person you've probably never heard of, someone who has quietly amassed a fortune without the flashiness of a public image, remaining practically unknown to the general public. His name is Robert Mansfield, and his story is one of patience, resilience, and a deep understanding of the power of long-term thinking. Let me tell you a bit about Robert's journey. It started in the early 2000s, at a time when small businesses were beginning to realize there was a huge opportunity in alternative investments, areas that were largely unexplored or dismissed by the mainstream. While everyone was focused on the same traditional investments, Robert began looking at emerging markets. He recognized that the world of investing was about to change, but not just in a small way. It was about to be revolutionized by technology, digital assets, and new market trends that no one could predict. But don't be mistaken. Robert's rapid success didn't come without risks. There were mistakes along the way, and a particularly massive one at the beginning of his career. It was a mistake that could have wiped out everything he'd built up to that point. Most people would have given up after facing such a big setback, but Robert didn't. Instead, he transformed that setback into a major opportunity. Robert's journey highlights a fundamental truth that many people don't grasp. Money never sleeps. It's always moving, always looking for the right opportunity. But if you don't know how to unlock it, you'll miss out. Now, you might be thinking, but isn't this all just a matter of luck? Well, Robert would tell you that luck is a small part of the equation, but patience and strategy are far more important. The reality is that most people in the financial world are not willing to do the hard work that it takes to be successful. They look for quick wins. Most investors think that just by putting their money into stocks or real estate, they'll eventually strike it rich. But Robert realized something that few understand. Financial success doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time, and it happens when you know how to position yourself in the right way. Financial experts agree that patience is the number one trait of a successful investor. Most people don't have the staying power to make it through the ups and downs of the market. Why? Because the key to investing is understanding the mechanisms of time and human psychology, and how those elements create opportunities that others fail to see. Robert's story is a perfect example of this. While most of the world was focused on traditional investments, Robert decided to take a different path. He began looking at future trends that no one was paying attention to. He saw how the internet, technology, and emerging digital assets would transform the world in the coming years, and he acted on it before anyone else did. For instance, let's take a look at Robert's decision to invest in cryptocurrency. Back in 2015, Bitcoin was still considered a niche product, something for tech geeks and enthusiasts with little mainstream credibility. People were still laughing at it, calling it a fad or a bubble. But Robert saw the long-term potential. He knew that digital currencies could disrupt the traditional financial system in ways that no one had even begun to understand. So, while everyone else was making safe investments in stocks and real estate, Robert took a risk. He invested heavily in Bitcoin and several other altcoins that were still in their infancy. At the time, these altcoins weren't on anyone's radar. They were risky investments, and most people thought he was crazy. But guess what? A few years later, those altcoins skyrocketed in value, and Robert turned a modest initial investment into a multi-million-dollar fortune. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds like a one-in-a-million opportunity. And in some ways, it was. But the point isn't about getting lucky. It's about being in the right place at the right time and having the vision to see what others couldn't. Robert didn't take these risks blindly. He did his homework. He researched emerging technologies, understood the underlying principles of cryptocurrencies, and learned everything he could about blockchain technology. He didn't just invest in the first shiny object he saw. He was strategic. But here's where Robert's story takes a turn. Like all great investors, he made mistakes. In fact, one of the first investments he ever made nearly ruined his career. He put all his money into a tech startup, which had a groundbreaking product and the potential to change the market. But within a year, the startup's key executives were involved in a major scandal, and the company lost its funding. Robert had put his faith in the wrong people. But instead of panicking, he took a step back. He didn't just throw in the towel. Instead, Robert took that painful failure and used it to propel himself forward. He understood that failure is never the end. It's simply a part of the journey. He learned to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. That's when he realized one of the biggest secrets to success. Opportunity often arises during the darkest times. Rather than run from failure, Robert leaned into it. He found ways to recover from his losses, and he used the lessons from that experience to refine his strategies. He took those hard-earned lessons and began looking for undervalued assets, companies that had been hurt by market fluctuations but still had the potential to rebound. You may not know this, but some of the world's most successful investors are people who've experienced failure firsthand. Warren Buffett, for example, lost a lot of money early in his career, but the key was that he never stopped learning. He adjusted his strategies, adapted to changing times, and came back stronger than ever. And the same goes for Robert. The more he learned, the better he became at spotting opportunities, minimizing risk, and finding undervalued assets. So, here's my question to you. Have you ever let failure stop you? Or are you someone who sees failure as an opportunity to learn and grow? Because that's what separates the successful investors from the rest of the crowd. It's not about how many times you fall, but about how many times you get up and keep moving forward. Now, let's dive deeper into Robert's journey and see how he transitioned from his early mistakes to becoming a powerhouse investor. After overcoming his initial setback, Robert found himself at a crossroads. While many people would have hesitated, fearing further losses, Robert saw a unique opportunity. He understood that success in investing isn't just about picking the right stock or making a timely trade. It's about adapting to market changes and making calculated decisions based on long-term vision. Robert knew that the financial world was evolving rapidly, and when the subprime mortgage crisis hit in 2008, he was ready. While the rest of the world panicked and started liquidating their portfolios, Robert took a different approach. Instead of fleeing to safer investments, he doubled down on his belief that the crisis would eventually give birth to new opportunities. He understood that every crisis brings a chance for those who are prepared. Many investors sold off their assets in fear. But Robert saw the market in a way that most others didn't. He recognized that, in the midst of all the chaos, there were undervalued assets in sectors that would soon rebound. But how could he capitalize on this? He started looking at the broader picture. Rather than focusing solely on short-term profits, Robert focused on industries that were either on the brink of collapse or those that were relatively untouched by the crisis. The housing market was plummeting, but Robert saw a huge potential in tech companies that had been left behind because of the crisis. One sector that stood out to him was the emerging tech industry. As the world shifted from traditional business models to digital models, Robert invested in cloud computing, cybersecurity, and mobile technologies. He focused on companies that were poised for growth once the dust settled. These were risky investments, yes, but Robert had learned how to navigate uncertainty, and he trusted that his patience would pay off. And it did. By 2010, his investments began to see substantial growth. The tech companies he'd invested in started to rebound as the world adapted to a new digital landscape. But what made Robert's investments truly remarkable was his ability to recognize future potential where others only saw chaos. But here's where it gets even more interesting. As Robert gained more confidence in his investments, he started focusing on the psychology of the market. Most investors act based on short-term emotions, fear, greed, and panic. Robert knew that the key to success wasn't just about picking the right stocks. It was about understanding human behavior in the markets. And so, he started studying the psychology of investors during market crashes, boom periods, and moments of extreme volatility. What he found was incredible. Most people make investment decisions based on emotion rather than logic. When markets are high, fear of missing out, FOMO, drives people to buy. When markets fall, fear of loss causes them to sell. But Robert realized that the market is driven by emotion, not logic. The more he understood this, the better he became at making decisions that were not swayed by short-term emotions but guided by long-term trends. Let me give you an example. In 2013, when Bitcoin was still a niche digital asset with little mainstream attention, Robert began investing in cryptocurrency once again, despite the huge risks. He didn't buy into Bitcoin because it was trending. He saw it as a long-term store of value that could eventually rival traditional financial systems. Robert didn't just follow the crowd. He didn't think about making a quick profit. He was thinking about the future. While others were skeptical, Robert took his time to understand the technology and its potential to disrupt the financial industry. By 2017, Bitcoin had reached an all-time high, and Robert had accumulated a significant position in the digital currency, making millions in the process. Robert's decision to take a calculated risk on something as volatile as Bitcoin is a testament to his ability to make informed decisions. He didn't just chase trends or make impulsive decisions. He invested in things he believed in, despite popular opinion. That's one of the major reasons Robert was able to achieve such success in a world full of fleeting trends and speculative investments. However, Robert's success wasn't just about getting ahead of the curve in terms of technology. He also started making strategic decisions about his personal life and how he managed his time. The next major turning point in Robert's journey came when he realized that time is the most valuable asset an investor can own. At first, Robert had been deeply involved in every aspect of his investments. He'd analyzed every stock, researched every trend, and closely monitored every market shift. But as his portfolio grew, he began to understand that delegating tasks and surrounding himself with experts was the key to scaling his success. He realized that he couldn't continue to make every decision on his own if he wanted to expand his wealth and maintain the balance in his life. This is where Robert made a key pivot in his career. He focused on building a powerful network of skilled individuals, financial advisors, tech experts, and industry leaders who could help him make better decisions. But this wasn't just about hiring the right people. It was about learning from them and using their knowledge to drive his own investments. He didn't just want to invest his money. He wanted to invest his time in finding the right people who could guide him through the complexities of today's markets. Another major lesson Robert learned was the importance of diversification. After his initial success, Robert diversified his portfolio, realizing that focusing on a single asset class could be a risky move. Instead, he spread his investments across several industries, from tech startups and green energy to real estate and global financial markets. He knew that, by diversifying, he would not only protect himself from market volatility, but also position himself to capitalize on growth in different sectors. While others were sticking with traditional stocks, Robert was looking ahead. He invested heavily in the green energy revolution. By 2015, his investments in renewable energy companies began to take off as global awareness about climate change grew. He understood that the future would rely on clean, sustainable energy sources, and he positioned himself to be a leader in that sector. In 2020, as the world faced the impact of the pandemic, Robert's diversified investments kept him resilient. Green energy, technology, and digital assets were areas that continued to thrive despite the global slowdown. As others scrambled to stay afloat, Robert's portfolio weathered the storm. Now that we've seen how Robert Mansfield weathered financial storms and turned challenges into golden opportunities, it's time to explore the next phase of his journey, where he elevated his game from being a smart investor to becoming an industry influencer. After his initial successes and building a diversified portfolio, Robert began looking at something that most people overlook: the power of timing and the psychology of wealth. By the time 2015 rolled around, Robert had already achieved financial independence. His investments in cryptocurrencies, tech stocks, and green energy had paid off handsomely, but now he was looking at a much larger picture. He realized that true wealth doesn't come from simply amassing assets. It comes from leveraging your influence and your ability to predict future trends before they become obvious to the rest of the world. This was a turning point where Robert became more than just an investor. He became a strategic visionary. He started to ask himself, what makes a successful entrepreneur and investor stay ahead of the curve? What is the one thing that the richest and most successful people in the world all share? The answer, Robert discovered, was that they all had an acute sense of timing and market awareness. But there was another key factor: psychology. Here's where Robert's approach became truly unique. While most investors act out of emotion, fear, greed, anxiety, Robert understood that the market is driven by human psychology. People fear what they don't understand. When a financial crisis hits, the first thing many investors do is sell everything off, thinking it's the end of the world. Robert, however, had learned the art of staying calm in chaos. He studied investor behavior and learned how to predict market reactions based on human emotions, not just on financial reports. For example, let's look at the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. While the world was scrambling to figure out how to handle the health crisis, Robert made a series of calculated moves that paid off significantly. While many stocks plummeted, Robert saw opportunity in healthcare stocks, technology, and online education platforms. He knew that people would flock to digital solutions during the lockdown, and that companies providing healthcare and essential services would see a boost. By the time the market stabilized, Robert had positioned himself in some of the most profitable sectors of the post-pandemic economy. His investments in telemedicine, e-learning platforms, and sustainable tech companies went on to thrive as the world adapted to a new reality. The key to Robert's success was that he didn't just react to market trends, he predicted them. And he didn't just predict what was going to happen next in terms of financial gains. He predicted the emotional pulse of the market. He understood that investors are emotional creatures, and that understanding these emotions could give him a massive edge. When everyone else was fearful, Robert knew how to capitalize on those emotions by finding the assets that were unfairly undervalued due to panic. While others were running for the exits, Robert was buying into opportunities others couldn't see. But it wasn't just about making money. It was also about maintaining perspective. As Robert continued to expand his empire, he also became more focused on the impact he could make. After all, wealth isn't just about collecting assets. It's about leaving a legacy. This is when Robert shifted from being just a successful investor to becoming an advocate for impact investing in projects that not only promise financial returns, but also create positive change in the world. This was a major shift in his mindset. Robert started to see the bigger picture. The world was changing, and he had the power to shape that change. He began investing in sustainable energy, education for underprivileged communities, and social enterprises that aimed to solve pressing global issues. Robert knew that with his wealth, he could be a force for good, not just in his own financial world, but in the wider world. His vision expanded to include impact-driven businesses, where profits weren't the only measure of success. He focused on building a portfolio that would help drive global change while still yielding solid returns. And this leads us to another crucial lesson Robert learned: the power of diversification and multi-sector investing. It was no longer enough for Robert to just focus on traditional markets. By 2020, he understood that the future was interconnected, and his investments had to reflect that. He began to integrate his investments across various sectors that work together, like renewable energy, technology, healthcare, and financial services. This way, if one sector faced challenges, others could provide stability and ensure the continued growth of his portfolio. By creating this interdisciplinary portfolio, Robert didn't just shield himself from volatility. He also leveraged synergies between different industries. For example, his investment in green energy not only paid off as the world moved toward sustainability, but also boosted his investments in tech companies that created the infrastructure for that transition. By integrating his strategy across multiple industries, Robert ensured that his wealth wasn't just protected, but actively multiplied in a way that allowed him to remain agile, no matter the economic climate. Robert's focus on financial education became another cornerstone of his approach. As his wealth grew, he realized the importance of helping others achieve financial success. He didn't just want to keep all the knowledge to himself. He wanted to share it. This is why he became a mentor to young entrepreneurs and a champion for financial literacy. His goal was to ensure that others could learn from his journey and avoid the pitfalls he had faced early on. He even launched a financial literacy platform to educate individuals on the principles of investing, wealth management, and long-term financial planning. Robert wasn't just content with his own success. He wanted to empower others to achieve it as well. In doing so, he created a legacy of knowledge, not just wealth. He understood that true success is measured not only by how much money you accumulate, but also by how much you pass on to others. As he moved into the next phase of his career, Robert realized that investing wasn't just about numbers. It was about people, values, and vision. This is what made him not just a successful investor, but visionary leader in the world of finance. He recognized that the real value of wealth lies in how you use it to create a better world. And that's exactly what he did. His investments were not just financial. They were purpose-driven. Robert understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars alone. It's measured in the positive change you can create. We've seen how Robert Mansfield started from a massive setback, turned it into a fortune, and evolved into a visionary investor and impact-driven leader. But what happens once you've achieved everything you set out to do? When you've earned millions, built a legacy, changed lives, and even helped shape the future of industries? Well, for Robert, that moment wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter. Because at the core of his philosophy lies one simple but powerful truth. Wealth is not the destination. It is a tool. By 2022, Robert had officially stepped back from day-to-day investing. His portfolio had become self-sustaining, generating millions in passive income through dividends, royalties, licensing, real estate, and long-term capital gains. While most people dream of this kind of freedom, Robert knew that freedom is only valuable if you use it wisely. Instead of retiring to a private island, Robert did something else entirely. He went back to the basics. He began mentoring a new generation of entrepreneurs and investors. He hosted private workshops, gave talks at global summits, and founded an exclusive investment circle dedicated to helping everyday people learn how to make money work for them, not the other way around. His mission was now global, to democratize financial intelligence. But what made Robert different from your typical self-proclaimed guru is that he never sold a dream. He didn't promise overnight riches or miracle shortcuts. He told the truth. He told people what it really takes to build wealth. Years of learning, calculated risks, emotional discipline, and the ability to think 10 steps ahead when everyone else is reacting to step one. At one of his speaking events, Robert said something that became a defining quote among his followers. If your money doesn't work harder than you, you're still a prisoner, even with a high salary. And that's what drove his final evolution. Not just being rich, but being free. Let's pause for a moment, because this is where the story becomes about you. Maybe you're just starting your financial journey. Maybe you're buried in debt. Maybe you've tried investing and lost money. Maybe you're stuck in a 9-to-5 job, watching other people succeed online, and wondering if you'll ever escape the rat race. Let me tell you something that Robert would tell you himself. It's not too late, but you have to start now. Because wealth, real wealth, is built slowly, quietly, patiently. It's not built on hype or fear or blindly following trends. It's built when you learn how money works, when you understand how to control your emotions, and when you're willing to make sacrifices today for freedom tomorrow. Robert always insisted that the difference between a struggling investor and a successful one is rarely talent. It's almost always mindset. That's why he spent the final years of his career studying not just markets, but the psychology of success. Why do some people give up after their first loss, while others treat it as a lesson? Why do some chase every get-rich-quick scheme, while others quietly build empires over decades? The answer lies in one word: discipline. Robert believed that financial literacy should be taught like a life skill, and he argued that if more young people understood how compound interest works, how a simple $100 invested today can become tens of thousands over 30 years, they'd think very differently about how they spend and save. He once shared an exercise with a group of college students. He said, "Take your phone, open your bank app. If you have $100, congratulations, you have the seed of a fortune. But only if you plant it today." That single line sparked thousands of people to begin investing, even with small amounts. And that's the real genius behind Robert's method. He made wealth accessible. He removed the myths. He gave people tools. He empowered them to make their own decisions, to design their own lives, to stop living in survival mode and start building legacy mode. In his last public address, Robert said something that gives us the perfect way to end this story. Your greatest asset is not your income. It's your ability to think, to adapt, and to act. You can lose all your money, but if you've learned how to create value, you'll never be poor. So, if you made it this far in the video, take this as your sign. This isn't just a story about Robert Mansfield. It's a challenge, a wake-up call, a blueprint. Whether you're in New York, Nairobi, Dakar, or Delhi, the rules are the same. The market doesn't care where you're from, but your choices do. So start reading, start learning, start saving, start investing, start talking to people smarter than you, start surrounding yourself with those who believe in growth. Start small, but start now. And remember, you don't need millions to begin investing. You need a decision. Because the secret isn't in the stock market. The secret isn't in crypto. The secret isn't in the next shiny object. The secret is in you. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want your money to work for you while you sleep. And leave a comment. What's your biggest money goal for this year? Let's build it together.